Hello, hello. Thank you for joining. Welcome to our new webinar series, the Power Series. And first of all, we hope that you're all staying safe and positive in these challenging times. Today, our CEO, Diana Verde Nieto, will be in conversation with the model and environmentalist, Arizona Muse, the CEO of Miller Harris, Sarah Rotheram, and the advisor, speaker, and writer, Andrew Winston, to discuss the power of conversation and how to dialogue in times of social distancing. Before we start, I wanted to let you know that you can submit your questions anytime in the Q&A box, and our panelists will answer them at the end. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you very much for everybody in my team for helping out to put this together. And a special thank you and gratitude to Andrew, Arizona, and Sarah for today. So first and foremost, how are you doing?
Good for me.
Okay. Alone in our houses with our families, you know, staying secluded.
Yeah.
Safe.
Nice.
It's a nice family time.
I can't get off this computer screen. I've been on so many Zoom calls. So we're kind of the end of the day is great though.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat. I'd like to start. I mean, you all individually have inspired me for what you do in a everyday life. I mean, Andrew, you use the power of conversations to work with top CEOs into transforming organizations. Arizona, you have been a climate activist and incredibly vocal to really transforming companies and behaviors of people. Sarah, you inspire me. When you started Miller Harris, you have done transformational work, and we can safely say that Miller Harris is one of those incredible companies that are probably in the forefront of sustainability. So the question to you is, how can we better use dialogue in these difficult times?
Andrew, would you like to go first?
Oh, I get to go first? Okay.
Why not, Andrew? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's obviously a different time. You know, we're in a physically different space than we've normally been for most of us. We don't normally spend 24/7 with our families or in our own home. And the nature of conversations has changed, right? In a way, I find there's so few distractions. I mean, there's always the internet, there's always things on your screen, but you're not moving through the world. We have nothing scheduled in our personal lives. There's nothing to go do. There's no kids' activities to drive them to. The whole whiteboard in our kitchen is blank, and it opens up, I think, kind of a different conversation, even just within my family, about what do we want to do today? What games do we want to play? What do we want to do to get done around the house? Like, we're having this. It's like a weekend day all the time, but which isn't great for working at home, I suppose. But it's really good for the family. And I find that the incredible explosion of using Zoom, obviously, over the last couple weeks has been really interesting. I'm in dialogue, I guess, with both friends and colleagues more than I was before. I'm getting visual connections through Zoom of people that maybe I only saw at events every year or two, and we're connecting and saying, okay, let's get on a group call to talk about some issue. And things are getting very just much more personal, right? You get on a work call and you start with, how are you? How's your family? How are your parents? Is everybody safe? I think we're feeling a connection now through our conversation that is global. This is the first time maybe that we've all faced something together, like everybody on the planet, every country. And I think it's like some of our other challenges, but we've never, like climate, like inequality, other things but we've never kind of felt it this real. So I think, the dialogue is just starting, really. We're at the beginning of this, and I think we'll see where it goes.
Thank you. Arizona, what about you?
Similar to Andrew, I've also found that this has had a big impact on my family life. It's been amazing to spend a lot more time with my husband and with our children, all of us together. It's been an adjustment. And it's not all like fun and games because we didn't plan this holiday, but we're getting a holiday. And so this holiday is coming with stresses about my husband's practice. He's an osteopath, and he of course, for responsibility, had to close his practice even sooner than the government announced that businesses needed to shut, because he works in close contact with people, and to keep everyone safe, he had to do that. And that was a big decision for him to say that, because the loyalty he feels to his patients, the low level stress he feels now because he's not fulfilling his work, and because his work can't be done over Zoom. It's a very physical and very personal conversation, and it's not. So I'm really feeling for all those people whose jobs are not able to be done on a video conference, because there are obviously plenty of them who are feeling this kind of odd, like, yes, great gratitude to have more family time, but at the same time that comes coupled with stress of not knowing what is next for my business. Am I going to be able to return to my business soon? How soon is soon? So I think it's a big conversation, and everything is happening. There are always two sides to every story, whether it's our personal story or the greater story of the world. What we decided to do is, I was feeling very vulnerable being in a city, actually, because I'm really passionate about regenerative agriculture. And so I've been doing a lot of learning about farming and growing food and what that entails, and the food supply chain as well. And so all of this information that I've learned in the last couple of years really surfaced as soon as Corona arrived. And I immediately felt really unsafe in a city with 10 million other people and without access to land. We live in a flat on the 8th floor. So we cannot grow anything for ourselves. It just is not an option. And so I started looking for farms that we could go and stay on as a family and contribute to the farm life and be a part of growing food and have access to really fresh, amazing produce. And so we luckily, and I feel so incredibly grateful for this, we found a farm and we've rented a cottage on the farm. We're in Devon, and it's just beautiful here. There are other kids. I mean, we could not have fallen into a more kind of heavenly situation right now, considering the global situation.
Thank you. I mean, Sarah, for you, you've got a global business with offices in China. You've got, I don't know how many, but a lot of employees. So, I mean, where you stand, I mean, conversation is incredibly important.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting listening to the both of you sort of refer to this sort of unexpected holiday time. My last 10 days since we closed our office, I've never been busier, if I'm really honest. And that's partly because every day has changed from, a day feels like a week at the moment. And the initial shock and stress of how do we keep going as a business was enormous, if I'm honest. And talking about conversation, I think conversation with my friends and family has always been very much like, how are you? But I think there's two or three other conversations that's worth reflecting on. So first of all, the conversation with our team, because obviously we were concerned, not necessarily first and foremost about, and I shouldn't maybe say this in front of my shareholders, but how do we keep paying people? How do we impact people's lives as little as possible through these really uncertain times? So there's been a huge amount of work being done to sort of protect our employees, and with that brings a different conversation you're having with your staff. Reassuring them. And normally, as being really frank, normally as a leader, I wouldn't share that much information with my staff until there was clarity. We don't have clarity from the government right now about what does furloughing mean, what does it mean about their salaries. However, in this difficult time, dialogue is better than silence, because everyone's feeling incredibly nervous around all the uncertainty. So where I would normally hold back and rely on facts, we've been having very frank conversations, and I think that's probably one of the things you're seeing happening globally. There's an honesty and authenticity around the conversation coming through, from how we feel to our pressures. If I'm talking to other CEOs, you know, our first thing is like, oh my God, what are you doing? How are you coping? Whereas that wouldn't normally be that, you know, the way that we would start our conversations with each other. And similarly, I think, you know, if I can just reflect on the conversation we're having with our customers, or other brands are having with their customers, it's not really the moment to be selling. You know, we of course sent out a Mother's Day message, but most of our other messaging, and you'll see lots of brands, apart from a few insensitive ones I might point out, are having a conversation with a customer. It's not about selling products, but it's about building a true relationship and dialogue with their clients. You know, we decided to do something to help. You know, I was a great believer in, I felt utterly hopeless when this first started to hit us. So we moved into action and decided to donate our entire soap and hand wash stock to the vulnerable in society, the elderly. And we've done lots of things since then, which we haven't been publicising, from, you know, sending to food banks. You know, when you read in the news that food banks don't have soap, and actually soap is the thing that helps us in this, you know, that sense of purpose and acting, and having my team support us in that. It's a completely different dialogue than you maybe would have seen more recently. And then I want to talk about, just maybe touch on like the dialogue as a whole that's going on out there. And it's really interesting, you know, even down Facebook, people are saying, oh, you know, can you have a conversation with me beyond a thumbs up and a high five? So that, you know, there is also this sort of really interesting to me, this dialogue around kindness and hope that's happening online, on social channels. And just when we were chatting the other day, I gave the example of the village I live in. You know, it used to be, I'll be honest with you, I used to find it so dull. I didn't check in very often because people would talk about car parking and the sheep that had escaped. I live in the country, by the way. And, you know, all the sort of niggles that happen in village life. And within the space of a week, it's, what are we going to do to help? How do we set up food banks? You know, how do we help the elderly that are stuck in their homes? And this real sense of community that was probably always there, but had kind of been a little bit forgotten. So I think when we talk about dialogue, there's a ramification of conversations that are happening in our lives in different channels and different people that we're interacting with.
Can I jump in, Diana, and
Yes.
build on that a little bit? I mean, there's a lot to say on the kind of part about what Sarah's doing as a company and others. I want to come back to that in a second, because that's more my realm, working with companies. But just, you know, personally, I guess if it sounded like I'm on holiday, maybe that wasn't the right phrase. I mean, my business, my business is speaking, consulting. You know, my business completely disappeared for the next few months at least, right? Every event is canceled, everything is done. I meant it kind of frees you up, like, to work on something maybe you haven't worked on before. But there's an incredible privilege that we probably should have started with. I mean, Diana and Positive Luxury are so relentlessly positive. It's in the name. That, you know, I think we want this to be positive, but I think we should just reflect on the luxury or privilege that we have on this call, and probably a lot of people on the call have, to have a home, a place to be, to ride this out for some time, even if it's, you know, economically very slow, have some savings. You know, when there's, in the US at least, there's 40-50% of the people who, you know, surveys show can't handle a $400 sudden bill, which this is now, right, within a week or less. And if we don't get the kind of stimulus that we need, people are going to be suffering. And I think that the tie to dialogue is, as you said, talking to your staff. I feel like we're all on this plane, and everything's always better when the pilot gets on and says, here's how bumpy it's going to be. You know, and I was sitting with a mid-sized company I'm on the board of, and it's getting kind of dire. The cash flow will be bad within a few months. And we talked about just being completely open with the staff. They want to cut 10-20% of, you know, costs immediately, maybe furlough people. And you just have to be incredibly transparent right now, I think, about where we're headed and how tough things could be. On the corporate side, I think what's really interesting is we were already in this huge sweep of a change in the idea of what a business is, the role of business in society. This is a lot of what my work is around. We were already in that over the last year or two, around climate, around inequality, about immigration, guns, lots of topics. And now all of a sudden, companies are really put to the test. And it's easy to say they should all do more, but they may not have the means. Some of them are just barely surviving, but the ones who do, we've seen some really interesting, in your sector in particular, LVMH, you know, converted factories to make hand sanitizer kind of right away. I just saw that Four Seasons Hotel is opening some of their hotels to healthcare workers in New York that are overwhelmed already, so they can stay there, because the hotel business is obviously, pretty much gone for now. So it's a big leap for these companies to go this far, but I think it's now what maybe people expect, for right or wrong. And I think there's an opportunity for companies, if they can handle it, if they have the means, if they have the balance sheet to do it, to really help, and to use their assets in a way that recognizes the emergency we're in. And that, to me, is a different conversation or dialogue that they're having as a brand with everyone, with their society and what they're about. It isn't just they don't have to care about their shareholders right now. It's, what are they doing for the community, for their employees? And people will remember, right? As you said, there's some brands you've noticed not doing the right thing. You will remember, customers will remember, and this is the time to stand up.
I mean, I just might add in, this is, from our side, we are a tiny team and we have the same challenges that you're describing or Sarah was describing. But one of the things, and you talked about solidarity, is this incredible, overwhelming kind of togetherness that we are receiving as a business, and also we can give as a business as well. And it's incredible. It's just so, I feel so grateful for the network, for the connections, for the people that come and say, do you need help? And I'm grateful for the people that actually say, when we go and knock at your door, for example, and say, can you help us? And you're guys, yes, of course. So I think we all read a lot about how great companies are. You rightly said it. Now it's like, okay, this is the time to show how great you are. And if you put your money where your mouth is. And I feel just like Sarah, the last 10 days has been the most challenging 10 days of my entire career. And really, really tough. Yet, I really think that if you keep true to who you are and to keep true to the values of your company, together we can actually get through anything. So again, thank you. I just want to talk about language. And Arizona, every time I hear you speak, and I've been very fortunate to be in panels with you and listen to what you say, I love your positivity, but not in a naive way, in a very open and honest way. So you have a passion for agriculture and for climate and for doing the right thing. And I think the way that language is used today is incredibly important to, just like you say, Andrew, the pilot said, right, the next couple of minutes is going to be bumpy, or the next 3 days is going to be bumpy. But I think the way you say things is so, so important. So can you share some tips and a little bit more about how does language affect behavior and what can we learn and where from? Over to you, Arizona.
Yeah, of course. I love using language to communicate, which sounds so basic because we use it every single day, but I think about it a lot, actually, how I use my language to communicate. And it's not just the words I say, but the tone of voice that we use has an incredible impact on the meaning of what we say and the way that the content is received. And I see that especially in my family life, with my children, with my husband. If I'm saying one thing, but my tone of voice is harsher than it should be, or is exasperated in some way, that's what comes across, is just the exasperation and not actually what I said at all. So maybe I was being helpful to my 10-year-old, but the tone of voice I used was rushing him. And I'm just really focusing on these nuances of communication these days, as I spend so much more time with my family than I'm used to, and how important it is to be conscious of the language we use and the tones of voice that we use while we're communicating, because that can set the stage for a really deep and wonderful, meaningful conversation, or a conversation where the participants leave feeling disconnected, even though they've just spent some time talking. And so that's something I think about a lot. And it's not easy, especially with your own family. It's easier in a meeting, it's easier in a work environment with professional adults. Then it kind of comes more naturally to be polite. But all that falls away when you're with your family and you're just kind of, and it all just comes out how you you're rushed, you're thinking of something else, maybe you were trying to answer an email, someone interrupted you, all these things. So I'm sure we all have these moments, but it's particularly surfacing right now.
Thank you. I mean, Andrew and Sarah, I mean, how do you use language and tones, and what can we learn? Because you use, well, obviously you have families, but also you have very different target audiences in sense of, Andrew, you work with CEOs and shareholders, and Sarah, you work with people, consumers. I hate the word consumers, but, you know, all of us that, you know, are your customers.
Sarah, you know?
Well, of course. I mean, language is important, incredibly important. I mean, if we take ourselves out of the current conversation, maybe that we're having, where I think we're probably all very careful about the words that we're choosing to use. In my line of work, obviously we sell perfume, so we actually work with our team an enormous amount on the kind of language they use when they're describing a product, and how much you can convey. Like, so you can, I'll just give you an example. So you could talk about a fragrance that's got like lots and lots of peony at the heart. So you could say clouds of peony, or absolutely oozing or dripping with peony. I mean, the language that we choose to use can convey so many emotions. And I agree, absolutely, the tone of voice, but also the context in which you put that in. So we work with language an awful lot. We're inspired by language. I mean, you know, we use quotes from books and poetry to inspire us every day. So I think that language is an integral part of our lives, is an integral part of my brand. But, you know, from a communication perspective, I mean, I absolutely agree with Arizona. It's not just about the words. You know, it's about the tone of voice that you use. And as you say, you probably let that slip more often than not when you're in familiar company, family, or really close friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the language, I see a couple of questions coming in that are actually kind of around this question around what are we learning during this period, and what does it mean for sustainability kind of as we come out of it or go back to things like climate change and others. And I think, I mean, Diana, you opened this actually with a perfect example that we call people consumers, right? That their only use in the economy is to consume things like locusts or something, instead of calling them people or citizens or something else. And we kind of get stuck in these circles. And, you know, I've been working, you know, for a number of years on how do you change the discussion in business from sustainability or eco or whatever you call it, being somehow the side of the business or a niche, rather than that just is how business is done. And thinking about, you know, words that we take for granted in business, like growth or responsibility, and really start to redefine them. You know, that what does growth mean? Is it just growth of shareholder value this quarter, or is it growth of your people, growth of the quality of what you do for the world? You know, we're going to have to redefine. I mean, this crisis is in part because of planetary boundaries, right? We are at limits, right? We come up against the natural world. We have people eating bushmeat because they don't have enough to eat. They don't have enough stuff. They're up against the natural world so close because there's 8 billion of us. This doesn't come like randomly, right? It comes because we're at the limit. And we have to be thinking about things like growth differently and talking about these words that are used in one way on Wall Street and in business, and use them in a more human and humane way. And that's going to be challenging. But I think this is, I hope, an opportunity that we can come through this and realize that we are all, you know, incredibly connected and in a very deep way, right? We're only as strong as like the weakest immune system in our society. And that's true of the business and its supply chain. That's true of like the connection we have across, you know, the value chain of a business, to use wonky business terms. And we have to kind of be talking about these things differently now. And I think when we come back to, we hope, to some level of normalcy, and we can start focusing again on climate and other things, maybe we can bring this sense of connection back with us, and the language of what it means to be a business or be a citizen as an entity or as a person will hopefully evolve.
I could not agree more. Sarah, I know we have discussed this quite a bit. So what's your take on this? Because I know you have quite strong views, and so is your Arizona. So I'd love to hear from you both.
From where we are with the virus, you mean? Look, I'm ever an optimist, and maybe this might sound quite strange, because unfortunately lots of people around the world are likely to lose their lives, but I'm a huge optimist that this is Mother Earth speaking to us, or however you want to look at it. It's a wake-up call, and I do think we will emerge from the other side of this, emerge into a world. I think we'll redefine what normal is, and I'm ever the optimist that we will learn a huge amount from this, both in terms of, I think it raises the sense of urgency around the climate and the planet forefront into people's minds, because I think, for the first time, we're actually understanding the fragility of humankind. And actually, this isn't something that the pound note can solve. This is about redefining what values are and redefining what's important to all of us. We've all mentioned family over and over again. Family, life, time. Luxury becoming time as opposed to something that's an expensive item, which sounds strange because I'm in the luxury world. But I do think, and I'm very hopeful, that we will emerge from this with much more of a focus on protecting our planet, and much more of a focus on what's important. And I have to say this, although it maybe differs to some other people's political views. We were in a point in the world where we were building walls, and we were, societies were becoming very secular. And I live in the UK, where we were thinking about ourselves very much as an island. This virus knows no bounds. It's not discriminatory. If anything, it couldn't have come at a better time to remind us that we're all humans, and we're all in exactly the same place. And that sounds in some ways very careless, because I know that lots of people are going to lose their lives, but lots of people were losing their lives every day to all sorts of things, from malnutrition, starvation, depression, and I think that us being so fearful as a human race might mean that we are a little bit more empathetic to some of those struggles that people are facing every day, and the planet is facing every day, and it's a bit of a wake-up call, I think. But meant in a very positive, optimistic way.
Thank you, Sarah. Arizona, last word before we go to the Q&As.
For last words, I'm going to move to some tips that I thought of for communication and having deeper communication, especially within your family unit, but this can be applied in the wider sense as well. First of all, put your phone away. You cannot have a good conversation with the person in front of you if you're also checking your emails or your messages or distracted by Instagram or a video. It really is a very simple rule that I now need to have in my life, because I cannot focus on a conversation when I've got my phone in my hand, especially if it's with my kids. So I would highly recommend that as a practice. It's really difficult. Oh my gosh, you'll find that you're so glued and attached to this thing that you expect that you should have a conversation like this, which is rude, actually. We shouldn't do that anymore, but it's become okay for some reason, and we have to change that as a society. I'd also like to invite people to make the positive assumption at the beginning of the conversation that you're going to learn something interesting from this person. Just assume that, because so often we go into a conversation assuming that we're going to say something interesting. Just forget about whether or not you're interesting. Focus on what the other person is going to say, because of course you'll end up learning something really valuable, and you never know who it's going to be from. It might be surprising who you find you learn the most golden nugget of information from. Also, enter a conversation knowing that you want the result of that conversation to be the connection between the people who had the conversation. It doesn't matter who was right or who was wrong. It's not about winning a conversation. It's about feeling connected at the end. Did I listen to you? Did I feel listened to? Did we meet each other where we are? Go with those and just see what happens in your conversational life, and desire to have a deep conversation.
Thank you. That is super insightful and very useful. Thank you so much. And in the bottom of your screens, you see the Q&As. And maybe what we can do is, I mean, there's some for you, Arizona. There, I mean, you guys can read it as much as I do. So maybe we can take them from the top, and you can all see it. So the first question is about, I mean, I love to be able to go through as many as possible. So maybe read the question and see which one of you want to take it. I think probably it's easier. I'll read the question. How can you keep your employment positive when you yourself don't receive enough positivity and clarity from your own bosses?
Shall I ask that one? Well, I think part of this is coming from yourself, from within. And also maybe I would suggest that you take just a step back. And, you know, I read this as you sort of, obviously you're feeling that there's not enough support from your boss, and maybe just as the employee take a moment back and think that maybe there's not clarity because they don't have clarity themselves. This is a very unusual situation we find ourselves in. And then you'll find that you resist the temptation to pass that down the line. You know, actually from yourself, think about your employees, their people. How would they like to be spoken to right now? How would you as an individual, you know, what's your boss not doing for you? And then it will help you understand how you can pass that down and actually fill in that gap, because you'll probably, if you reflect, be able to see what you mean when there's not positivity and clarity, to be able to provide that to your team yourself.
Thank you. And then how do you think people who are locked down at home can use this lockdown time to be ready for this transition to a new normal? And this could be to any of you.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I think, well, first, I just want to say, Arizona, if you don't think a conversation is about winning it, you haven't had a teenager yet, because that's a whole other level.
I have a 10-year-old and a 1-year-old, and my 1-year-old is more about winning the conversation, actually.
I'll call you in like 5 years, and we'll see how much winning you're doing versus your teenager. You know, how can we use this lockdown? I mean, I'm like I said before at the beginning, I'm finding myself in contact with some people, in part because we need it so badly, with some people from my field, even some people from my college life, whatever, that I haven't been in a while. I think it's actually, it actually builds your network, right? It's one of those assets we all have that we don't spend enough time on. It's always on my back burner, and to kind of reconnect with people in my field, I think gets us back, you know, maybe when we're back working again, we're reconnected to people that we can do good work with because we've reached out to them. There's obviously, if you have additional time because work is slowed, I'm with Sarah, in some ways things are busier, but if you have more time, this is the time to, you know, study or learn something in your field that you haven't been. I mean, I find, I write books in part for a living, but I haven't written one in 6 years because I find people don't read them very much. I ask people all the time because we're inundated, right? We have our phone in front of us. We have Facebook, Twitter, everything's coming in. And so if you ask someone, do you read like a book or something longer for your field, for your personal development? I find people don't very much anymore. And so maybe now's the time you can do that. You can step back and not just have these constant stream of workflow and say, what is it that I'm really wanting to learn? Or what's a bigger picture on something or some topic that I haven't spent time in, like artificial intelligence, and pick up a book or a long article, or just, you know, as a writer, I just wish people would embrace again these longer thoughts than just 280 characters or short. You know, a book is not 100 short articles, right? It's a longer thought. So that's, you know, as a writer, I guess it's self-interested to say, you know, can you use this time to really delve into something deeper?
Thank you.
I love that advice.
On the teenager? Yeah, I get it.
This one for you, Arizona. How do you think the dialogue around sustainability will be after we get through this?
I really, as an optimist as well and an enthusiast of nature, I really hope that it will be very, very different. I hope that our intergovernmental approach will be very different. I think the virus has taught us that, as you were saying, Sarah, we are one race. We are humanity. We are one. However, I also am a little disappointed to see that governments still aren't there yet, even around the virus. They're still not working together. They're kind of, with all the different protocols in different countries, it's as if governments are saying that my virus is different than your virus, which is very strange. Like, why are some countries recommending 2 weeks of isolation and other countries are recommending 1 week of isolation, as if this virus behaves differently in different countries? So I really, really want to see that governments can come together and create, some of it will be banning things, some of it will be encouraging good things, and finding the right balance to make sure that we get nature-based solutions working as quick as possible. And from all the reading and studying and talking to people that I've done, I really see that as being land focused and ocean focused and agriculturally focused. And so that I loved can I just jump to one of the questions on the Q&A that is about regenerative agriculture? From Anna Montfort, she asks about what my take is on the direct-to-consumer model. And I would like to talk about how this farm that I'm staying on right now has educated me on what's going on right now with farms. And that is a very sorry situation, because supermarket shelves are empty right now in cities, in a lot of places, but farms are overflowing with produce. And that is because the produce can't get to the shelves. And also mostly it's because people who used to sell to restaurants, farms used to sell directly to restaurants, suddenly found themselves without any business at all. People are stockpiling the wrong kinds of things, according to me. I mean, I have not stockpiled toilet paper. I've stockpiled as much fresh food as possible. And please, I would say to anyone, what you can do to help in this situation is buy farm boxes. Try to buy directly from farms who are producing food, especially as time goes on throughout this situation, however long it lasts. We still don't know exactly how long it will last. There's going to be a big problem in farms toward the summer, because in the summer is the time for harvest, and that's a big time for migrant workers. And as we know, no one can do any kind of migration right now. So farms are going to be really strapped for human capital, for people, for hands, for hours of time, and that is just an amazing, when you think about it, an amazing opportunity for community to come together and support each other. So think about what you're going to do this summer. And if we're all still in lockdown, I really hope the government is going to make it possible for people to move ever so slightly just to get onto a farm as near as possible to help with the harvesting. Otherwise, we're going to have a situation where we have a bountiful amount of food that is sitting on fields and rotting because there's no one to harvest it. And that's when the food shortage might happen, if there is ever a food shortage.
Andrew, you had thank you very much, Arizona. That is incredibly insightful. And I'm excited because we had a little bit of a conversation about this yesterday. And Andrew, you had this great story about avocados. I'd love you to share this with everyone.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going around in the internet. You don't know how much is true. There was stories that dolphins were back in the Venice canals, and that turned out, I think, to be a myth, but it was a nice image. I don't know if this is totally true, but it actually sounds logical that in the vein of what Arizona was saying, is that avocados are starting to back up because so much guacamole is eaten on cruise ships and obviously in restaurants, and that the demand direct to consumers, I guess, not a very big percentage of that. I mean, there's so much you could find funny about that, but we are learning so much more about where does stuff go, who's having it where. This is like the broader point on this. I guess I hope everybody, I've always wanted people in general to wake up about where things come from. If you ask a kid, where's the bread from? They might say the supermarket, right? And to know that there's a farmer, there's this whole value chain, there's these suppliers, smallholder farmers around the world. I think maybe people walking into a store in the developed world and for the first time seeing empty shelves is a shock to the system, because we've been telling people we're at planetary limits. We have to reduce kind of overall consumption in a smart way. And how can someone believe that when they can walk into a Costco or any mass store and see what looks like limitless stuff? And all of a sudden, there's actually constraints. And I'm hoping that people will wake up and go, oh, there isn't just infinite stuff. And if people, buy too much toilet paper for whatever reason they're doing that, I might not get any. We have to think about the commons, right? I think this is a chance to say we are all connected. If you think about how many people touch the things that you buy, and people are thinking about that now because of the virus, right? They're like, oh, when I bring in groceries, I have to wipe off the package because someone in the store touched it or someone put it together in the factory. We're finally getting that, like, there's this huge chain of people behind everything that we do. And I'm hoping that, again, gets us to a more humane place about, you know, what our consumption means, what our businesses mean, and we just think about the people connection more.
Can I follow on from that? Because there's actually a number of comments that questions I'm reading that's sort of saying, you know, what can we do around us being an artisan brand in the current climate? What should we do? What do we talk about in the current climate? How do we talk directly to our customers? What do we talk to with our followers? It's actually a similar vein, I think. Depending on where you are as a brand, I think now is a huge opportunity, particularly if you have artisan products, particularly if you are a farmer and you're selling direct, to be able to talk about your brand and your brand values. And actually, you know, in terms of sort of with regards to the environment, you know, people are making sort of choices about where they spend their money, and it has been happening for a long time. But now, actually, when we're realizing the pressures on our supply chain, we're realizing how much of our shopping we do in the supermarket rather than supporting the guy down the road, and this emergence of support local and keep them in business. I think now is a really good time not to sell to people. Don't want to be sold to. You know, when I said earlier, I touched on it, you know, sending me messages of pretty pink dresses to wear while you're at home is kind of not personally on my radar. But if people are talking to me about their brands and the authenticity and the things that matter to them, and it has to be authentic and it has to be done with integrity, you know, now is the time that you can talk to your customers about that. You know, what are the things that influence your brand? What are the things that you care about? You know, that now is the time for you to reach out to your audience and have a conversation with them. And again, I've seen lots of brands saying, what do you want to hear from us? Almost unheard of in the kind of luxury brand space. We usually talk to our customers. Lots of people saying, what do you want to see more of? Do you want to see behind the scenes? Do you want to see us making products? You know, I think, you know, it answers a number of the questions that are popping up here. Now is a really good time to communicate values. Now is the time for you to have a look at, can you come back and do business in a different way? There was a question on here which Andrew obviously might be really good to answer as well, because you probably have these conversations quite often, asking, you know, how do we sort of, people are still going to be looking at the balance sheet, how do we balance that with, you know, our sort of environmental values?
Well, look, I mean, there's a much longer answer that takes books, I guess. The short answer is that if you're familiar with the, you know, the triple bottom line idea that, you know, John Elkington in the UK came up with 25 years ago, he did something interesting last year. He did a recall on the idea. He said, I created it, I'm recalling it, because it was never supposed to be, there's three different bottom lines. There's fundamentally one, right? There's just humanity's bottom line and how much well-being we're creating. So I guess I always reject the premise of starting with that trade-off mentality. Of course, there will be choices we make. And now there's some very hard ones, but when it comes to something like tackling climate change, the trade-offs have been so overblown. And in fact, the discussion in the policy circles, in particular on the kind of climate go slow, you know, generally right wing, has been it's going to destroy the economy to tackle climate, when it's now the opposite, right? We're now in it was always a weird thing to say. And we're having that same discussion right now, I can't believe it, maybe more in the US than elsewhere, about whether it makes sense to even try to save all these lives because the economic costs. And they always seem to miss that if we go down this path of lots of people dying from a disease or not worrying about climate change, there will be economic costs from that are vast. And we always act like we only look at the cost of changing and not the cost of not changing. And so I think, again, it's a language thing. If we talk about what makes a profitable business or a profitable sector in the economy, it has to include how well they're taking care of people and planet, because those are the base resources, right? The pillars supporting our economy. And if we keep underpinning those, the cost will just outweigh the cost of doing something. So there was a question in here about how do we value things. This has always been really, really difficult. How do you value in a business in a concrete way the reduction in risk of doing some of the things we're talking about, or the resilience in the business? How do you put a value on that? It's challenging, but we currently kind of put zero value on it, and that's not right either. So we have to be better at thinking more broadly about the choices we make in business, and I think in our personal lives about what value does that create. So it isn't thought of as this trade-off. And I think on the environmental side, the trade-offs are very, very few. I think on the social side, things get harder. You know, if you talk about everyone in your supply chain having a living wage, it just raises your costs. There's no way to avoid that. But the question is, are we moving to a place where, especially millennials, Gen Z, don't want to buy anything that isn't made that way, right? And so then it's not a cost, it's just how business is done. And that's where I think we're headed. And this, we haven't talked about this yet, but the effect on Gen Z of what's happening right now is, I don't think we know yet. This is their 9/11, right? This is I keep telling my teens, write something down. Start thinking about this, because your grandchildren are going to ask you about this moment in history. And I don't know what that's going to make them as consumers, as people who work for a living. They're in the streets already on climate. What else are they going to get worked up about now? And they're coming of age. So there's something that's maybe about to happen that will shock the boomers and us Gen X. I think we're all, well, not you, Arizona. We're Gen Xers on the call besides Arizona. You know, I think it's going to be a shock to the system.
I do agree with exactly with what you're saying. I think we have not yet seen the effects of these, just only the immediate effect, but not the long-term effect. What I propose, because we are actually over time, so I'd like to hand it over to Claudia, not before saying thank you so much to Sarah, to Arizona, and to Andrew for your time and your insights. If you have some time to actually type some answers to all the questions, would be amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I'd like to hand over to Claudia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, Andrew, and Arizona. It was a great conversation. We want to hear from you. Please email us, DM us, comment on social. We want to know your thoughts. Our next webinar will be next Thursday at 2 p.m. With 3 special guests. Sign up to our newsletter and you will receive your special invitation. Thank you again.